And I said, I wanted it at the beginning because when we, as a global faith community that's concerned about sustainability, concerned about our ecological future, we often don't think about cities as important to that. And so I wanted to put cities into the very first dialogue so that as we talk over these next several days about all these subjects, that we will have inserted into them from the very beginning this matter of cities as a cross-cutting understanding, a cross-cutting perspective of how we can, as a faith, globally relate to and have an impact on our sustainable future. So let me introduce to you, and hopefully that will happen, that we'll have a really great conversation today with content and expertise provided by these speakers. So let me introduce them. And I'm going to start off by introducing, and these are not in the order of the way that they will speak, except for this very first person, who you may well know, and that's Dr. Iyad Abu Mobley, the founder director of Faith for Earth Initiative at UNEP, who has more than 35 years of experience with international organizations, the private sector, and scientific institutions. His expertise and focus on strategic planning, sustainable development, natural resource management, interfaith collaboration, and knowledge and innovation, and now allows him to be the lead principal advisor on engaging with faith-based organizations at UNEP. He has a long biography, as do the other speakers, and as the speakers speak, their longer biography we put into the chat. So I'm just going to say a few words about all our speakers, but their full biography will be put in the chat. So moving on to the next speaker, I'd like to introduce Uvana Sant-Han-Am, the CEO of Global Outreach for Psi Global Federation of Foundations. Uvana has close to 25 years of experience in brand marketing and strategy communications, sustainability, and corporate social responsibility. In 2015, Ms. Sant-Han-Am left her lucrative and high-profile corporate career and decided to follow her calling by joining the service mission of Indian philanthropist and humanitarian Sai Baba, which brings respite to thousands of underprivileged and needy children through free healthcare, education, and nutrition across 30 countries. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Josh Yates, the director of the Almond Center and the executive director of Thriving Cities Group. Dr. Josh Yates is the executive director of the Almond Center for Thriving Congregations and Communities at Duke Divinity School, the senior fellow at the Keenan Institute of Ethics at Duke University, and founder and CEO of Thriving Cities Group, an independent NGO dedicated to equipping cross-sector leaders to work for the flourishing of their local communities and regions. He also currently serves as UN Habitat's SDG Cities Task Force. I'd like to introduce to you Kushwant Singh, head of the Secretariat, the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, PARD. Kushwant Singh leads PARD, which has around 150 members and convenes governments, multilateral entities, civil society, especially religious actors, and academia in a safe space, providing continuity for dialogue, learning, and collaboration to better inform policy and practices in achieving the sustainable development goals of the 2030 Agenda. We have with us Priestess Beatrice Schultes. Born in Argentina, She is a member of the Kola Nation, and it was instrumental in negotiation which led to the proclamation of the International Year of World Indigenous Peoples in 1993, as well as drafting of the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. She participated in the revision of the convention. She participated, in the revision of the convention 169 for Indigenous and Tribal Peoples, and in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of the Rights of the Child. She was active in promoting the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development and was appointed advisor to the General Secretary on Indigenous Issues. We also have from UN Habitat, the Chief Urban Basic Service Sector, Mr. Andre Zikas. In his role as the Chief of the Urban Basic Service Section at the United Nations Human Settlements Program, or UN Habitat, he focuses on water and sanitation, energy, transport, solid waste, and ICT. His work covers all three pillars of UN, humanitarian response, peace, security, and development. We have from Birmingham, Cameron Shehzad. Cameron Shehzad is the director of the Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences and the director of the Bahu Trust in Birmingham, where he focuses on their sustainability portfolio. Mr. Shehzad is the climate change advisor to the Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board, also known as the MINAB. And finally, I'd like to introduce to you Kushwant Singh. I've already introduced him, sorry. So I think I covered everybody who was speaking today. And I'd like to turn it over to Iyad to make the first comments regarding this important topic. Iyad, could you speak to us, please?
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants across the globe, distinguished faith leaders, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure to be with you today in our first session of the Faith for Earth Dialogue, Changing the Future. This is an important session on faith communities enabling inclusive and equitable cities. Cities is where we live and where we interact with our environment. In 2030, more than 70% of the global population will be living in cities. Cities are considered an ecosystem by itself, where humans interact with living and non-living things in either a sustainable or unsustainable manner. We rarely think of the linkages between cities and our faith or religion, and what our religions have to say about cities and how they relate to it. It is amazing to know that cities in general, and some cities by name, were mentioned in our holy books. For example, there were 28 verses in the Bible about cities. And in the Holy Quran, cities or towns were mentioned 74 times. Cities have always been designed with places of worship at the center and the heart in the past. And today, we can find symbols of religion spread in every city in the world, from local churches to grand cathedrals, to mosques, to temples, or even cemeteries. Religions serve a social goal too, bringing together city communities to celebrate, lament, remember, and provide support to those in need. But do we know the real power of influence that religions have on the cities and on their dwellers? According to the new urban agenda, cities today occupy 2% of the total land. However, Religious institutions own 8% of habitable land on earth. That is 4 times the size of the area of all cities in the world. Globally, religious institutions own more than 50% of educational institutions, mostly in cities. These institutions shape the behavior of the people and thus impact our living and consumption patterns in cities. In addition, religious institutions produce more books than all the cities in Europe. This further shapes how we interact and live in cities. Today, there are more than 100 million churches, mosques, and temples in the world, mostly in cities. If you put them together as city buildings, they would be twice the size of New York City. These houses of worship provide basic shelter or spiritual refuge to the people. Others provide a substantial income from tourism for the city. But also, these houses of worship and religious schools are simply buildings that consume energy and water and have environmental footprints. If managed appropriately, would be great examples of how faith values of living gently on earth can be demonstrated. Many religious institutions use vans, buses, and automobiles to transport members and visitors or students to their schools. This massive fleet can either contribute to polluting cities if run on fuel, or contribute to a healthy air if turned to be electric. On the other hand, pilgrimage tourism, mainly to cities, constitutes an important component of the global economy and has contributed to the growth and development of cities. In 2018 alone, for example, an estimated 1/3 of international tourists traveled for religious purposes, with around 450 million international flights were made to religious sites in cities. Of course, this has changed after COVID-19. This does not only affect the socio-economic conditions of cities by providing employment, contributing to poverty alleviation, and generating foreign exchange earning, but also affect the environment in these cities by increasing pollution levels and all the environmental issues associated with consumption practices of those tourists. However, this does not have to be the case if green pilgrimage practices have been adopted. So I am delighted that we are here today and have our partners from the World Evangelical Alliance and from UN Habitat co-organizing this session, and with distinguished speakers from around the world and different organizations. So let's listen, learn, and decide together what can we do as faith communities to preserve this ecosystem and contribute to living in harmony with nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iyad, for these comments. You kicked us off perfectly, and I'm glad to invite Andre Zikas to speak next on his topic, which he's entitled, "What do we mean when we say people-centered cities?" Andre, thank you for your comments.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks a lot, Iyad, for this introduction. If I could kindly request to share my screen, this permission could be given to me.
Andre, you should be able to share your screen. It's the white box at the top of the screen with the arrow pointing upwards.
Yep. Let's see. Can you see my presentation now? Just a quick confirmation. Can my presentation be seen?
Not really. We can see it.
Not yet. Let me do that from my side.
Okay. Doesn't seem to be picking up. Okay, there we are. Okay, great. Okay, dear colleagues, thanks a lot for this opportunity. UN Habitat is really greatly honored to be associated with this event. And of course, I'd really like to congratulate UNEP and also the World Evangelical Council for organizing this event and also for scheduling it as actually the first in the sequence of faith dialogues, which UNEP is doing on the occasion of UNEA. And this is really befitting because urbanization is really a mega trend which is affecting all our lives. And we've heard from Ayat in his presentation that on the one hand, faith-based organizations have a big impact on the cities, but also on the life in cities, and especially many faith-based organizations are owning a lot of land, so they have and buildings and have a strong impact on cities. But on the other hand, also with limitation of space and land in cities, faith-based organizations have also had to change some of the ways they operate, especially when they're competing for land in urban areas, and have had to engage in other practices of securing spaces for their work. And I'd like to start off with some guidance which the Secretary General is giving us. The Secretary General has launched an agenda which he's calling Our Common Agenda. And he wishes this to guide us as we work on the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Secretary General feels that we are currently globally at an inflection point of either a breakdown or a breakthrough. And he feels that there's a time to re-embrace global solidarity and find new ways to work together for a common good. And it's time to renew the social contracts between governments and their people and within societies, and also to rebuild trust and to embrace cooperation with a vision towards human rights. And of course, the role of faith-based organizations, I feel, with this common agenda of the Secretary General are very important. There will be a summit which will be held in the future, and there will also be a high-level advisory group to the Secretary General to prepare on this common agenda, but also on the summits. And it would be quite encouraging to also see faith-based organizations engage in the preparation of the implementation of the common agenda and also the summit. The world has also given us very clear goals. On the one hand, we have SDG 11, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And we also have the New Urban Agenda, which was adopted in 2016, which sees urbanization as a key driver and source of development, as well as an engine for prosperity and human progress. Must be said that the preparatory process for the development of the New Urban Agenda was quite participatory, but at the initial stages, faith-based organizations were not strongly involved in this process. But after the New Urban Agenda was adopted, actually the first faith-based Urban Thinkers Campus was held in 2017. And it sort of says that the inclusion of germane faith-based perspectives and working relationships with faith-based organizations to commend the good are necessary for the success of the New Urban Agenda. Also, an interreligious council for urbanism has been created to support work in this area. But still much more needs to be done. And I believe this event is a good step forward in increasing the engagement of faith-based organizations in urban development and urban planning. One of the roles which faith-based organizations can play is, on the one hand, is on community mobilization. People-centered cities require a wide range of participation, and faith-based organizations which are working on the ground can play an enormous role in mobilizing their communities. One of the examples of mobilizing communities has also been with the rollout of COVID vaccinations, for instance, where faith-based organizations around the world at the community level, at the city level, have played a very big role. Another important role in terms of people-centered cities is the role which faith-based organizations play in terms of education and raising awareness. Faith-based organizations ensure that their communities are aware of urban challenges and solutions. At UN Habitat, we have for the last 15, 20 years been implementing a program on human values-based water and sanitation hygiene education, where faith-based organizations around the world have played a major role in raising awareness and knowledge about water conservation and water management. Faith-based organizations are also an important voice for the community to provide input into urban decision-making, especially when we're dealing with participatory, slum upgrading, and urban development processes. The third dimension, which is an urban dimension and also an important faith-based dimension, is building relationships between groups. Cities are made up of very diverse groups and different beliefs and values. An example of such a city, which is bringing together all the diverse groups, is the city of Auroville in India, which is a place where all faith groups, but all people from around the world can come together, irrespective of their nationality, and live together and apply these values. Social cohesion requires connections between groups, interfaith dialogues and platforms, and mediation facilitation in times of tensions. So these are three very important elements which we feel faith-based groups can contribute towards people-centered cities. Last but not least, looking at the SDGs, leave no one and no place behind. We have a lot of inequalities. Many cities have up to 50 to 60% of their inhabitants living in low-income settlements, slums, or squatter settlements. And faith-based organizations have been on the forefront of caring for marginalized and vulnerable groups and have become champions in these areas. So this is an area to be expanded and to extended. I'd just like to, before closing, mention some opportunities for faith-based organizations to engage in the urban debate. The high-level meeting will be held in the General Assembly for the review on the implementation of the new urban agenda on the 28th of April 2022. An important voice to be heard there are the faith-based organizations. And also the 11th session of the World Urban Forum will be held in Katowice in Poland from 26th to 30th of June. And the call is open for submission of events, which is going to close on the 7th of March. And I'd really like to encourage faith-based organizations around the world to make use of this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very humbled with the high level of panels on this session on faith and human settlements. And I'd like to close my session at this stage and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. I am thrilled by your presentation and the fact that you led off with the what we call the Singapore Declaration. So following Habitat 3 in 2017, we did have the first faith-based Urban Thinkers Campus. And that declaration, which we call the Singapore Declaration, because I helped organize this, held in Singapore, that states, and I'll just say it again, the inclusion of germane faith-based perspectives and working relationships with faith-based organizations co-committed to the common good are necessary for the success of the new urban agenda. And you're welcoming us as faith, people of faith and organizations to continue the dialogue, to come to these meetings, come to WOOF 11, come to the high-level consultation in New York, and have input is something that is very encouraging. And we're walking forward in this regard. And I appreciate you mentioning that, and that together UNEP, UN Habitat, that we're strengthening this relationship. So let me continue the conversation by turning it over to Priestess Beatrice Schultes to speak about indigenous perspectives and this topic. Priestess, thank you for your contribution. We can't hear you, Priestess. We need to hear your microphone. At the top of the screen, there's some controls.
Now, is it okay now?
Hear you now perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. To begin this presentation, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the United Nations Environmental Programme and the organizers of Faith and Earth for establishing a working relationship with Religions for Peace. Personally, I am grateful for the opportunity to contribute to one of the sessions leading up to the 5th UN Environmental Assembly 2022. Religions for Peace brings together world religions and faith traditions, and I represent the Indigenous Peoples' Ancestral Spiritual Council. Within Religions for Peace, we work on recognizing the connections between all forms of life and communities, which is an area that Indigenous people master, since connecting with all forms of life and knowing how to live in community is one of the areas of our traditional knowledge system and education. There is also a commitment within Religions for Peace to nurture a sustainable environment, which is of particular importance as we discuss the creation of sustainable cities. As we work on peaceful, just, and inclusive society, which is important to cities where many displaced people arrived and where poverty and inequalities cannot be hidden away. I was asking myself, where is it easier for people to live in decent conditions? Where is it easier to survive? In rural areas or in cities? Decision makers in most cases live in cities, and people in general have the perception that poor people mostly live in rural areas. People in rural areas, and in particular Indigenous people, we do not consider ourselves poor when there is a roof over the head, a place where to cook and share with others, an environment where it is possible to farm, hunt, fish, and collect what nature provides for our daily use. Mostly we do not strive to have a mansion, 2 cars, or 2 TVs, and so on. In rural community, it is possible to consume less and therefore spend less money. The consumption level in rural households is much lower than a household in a city. Of course, I'm talking about my area, Central and South America. In cities, it is impossible to live without regular income. Therefore, it seems to be easier, when possible, to live in rural areas. We have, for example, where I live, a lot of people coming from other countries, escaping the cities and wanting to live in our communities around here. Many Indigenous people live in cities, and some do so because they have chosen to study, to become professionals, to earn money, or in some cases because of unusual and difficult life histories. But even if we must live in a city, we will find ways to live in community, in harmony with the environment, and seek to connect with nature. Yet, the harsh reality is that it is extremely difficult to live in a city without a regular income. In big cities such as New York and Washington, I was shocked to see the amount of homeless people living in the streets. According to Deutsche Welle, the German TV station, in 2017, almost a quarter of the people living in Berlin were poor. But it is also important to mention that in the meantime, Berlin has taken measures to solve the problem. These are just 2 examples, but we all know that extreme poverty exists in cities throughout the world. Sustainable goal number 1, the Sustainable Development Goal number 1, reads end poverty in all forms everywhere And it seems to me that the word everywhere is very important here. And goal number 11 reads, make cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. It becomes clear that extreme poverty in cities must be addressed with the support of their respective governments. The development of rural areas should be imperative to ease the pressure on cities, since everything is connected. Now about migration. Immigration always existed, but the current massive immigration into city is taking place because of different reasons. Escape from conflict and war zones, loss of farmland due to land grabbing, bankruptcy of farmers that no longer earn enough for their agricultural products. Due to the consequences of climate change, the search of better opportunities, help their families that stay behind, escape discrimination and racism. In a website called Foreigners, I read that 208 million people were not living in their home countries in 2020. There must be more today. National Geographic claims that half of the world population live in cities. On a positive note, it is important to mention that some cities are making great efforts driven by visionary planning, such as Singapore, where they are looking at its developments 40 years ahead of time. Whilst they building, they also care for creating enough green zones for the development of nature and biodiversity. Copenhagen created a biking infrastructure. They build in a sustainable manner and transform waste into energy. Reykjavik, a smaller city, and the whole country, Iceland, produces more than 80% of their total energy supply by producing geothermal and hydropower. Berlin in Germany is implementing sustainable urban agriculture and increases the use of renewable energy. There are other cities that are implementing interesting ideas, such as the cities in the Nordic countries. But there are many other cities throughout the world that have not yet been able to move towards sustainability. Of course, there are obstacles, and one of the main ones is the imposition of economic development trends that focus only on economic growth than on people's rights. About sustainability. During a meeting that was held some time ago with indigenous people's spiritual guides, an explanation was given on the meaning of sustainable development. Following, it was unanimously decided that the way of life of indigenous people has always been sustainable. That to say sustainable development was not correct, and that it would be much better for everyone to say developing sustainability with the resources available. In order to bring about more sustainable cities, we must ask ourselves, what can we do individually and collectively in order to make life easier when living in cities? As indigenous people spiritual guides, we will continue to work to lift the energy and protect Mother Earth, to share our vision and experience with those that are interested to hear, spiritually uphold humanity, and work with others for a better world, for a better future. Together with Religions for Peace, we will continue to work for this global effort for peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Priestess. We appreciate your comments. We look forward to having a conversation about your topic, where you've highlighted, cities for Indigenous peoples and women. And I now want to turn it to Dr. Josh Yates, who's going to speak on the title of his talk, Why Religious Communities Are Critical to a More Livable Future for People and the Planet. Thank you, Dr. Yates.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the hosts and organizers of this vitally important dialogue and for inviting me to be part of it. I'm truly delighted to be able to participate with such an extraordinary group of fellow presenters and panelists, and I look forward to the conversation that will follow. Let me begin with a brief introduction for some background of why I'm excited to be part of this conversation and about the remarks I'll share. As Chris mentioned in his introduction, I currently serve as the Executive Director of the Orman Center at Duke Divinity School. The mission of the Orman Center is to equip religious congregations to work together with their wider communities in both rural and urban contexts to overcome barriers to the thriving of all their members. I also lead the Thriving Cities Group, an NGO that fosters collaborative problem solving and community building for people and planet. Lastly, I come to this conversation as a member of UN Habitat's SDG Cities Task Force, of which I'll have more to say at the end of my remarks. So the relationship between faith and the possibility of inclusive and equitable cities has been central to my work and calling for the past 30 years. The title of my talk, Why Religious Communities Are Critical to a More Livable Future for People and Planet, I'll have much to say about. But before I get to the role of religious communities in particular, I'd like to begin by making it clear why cities are a critical front in the work of securing a more livable future for all, especially at this moment. I'll echo some of the remarks that have already been made, but it's probably worth rehearsing them. For better and worse, cities are the main economic engines of the world today, making economic opportunity largely concentrated in cities, though it needs to be added that not all cities are equally competitive in the global economy. Today, cities account for 80% of global GDP, and researchers project that by 2025, just 600 cities will account for over 60% of global GDP. It's not surprising then that we're seeing the largest migration of people in the history of the world moving from rural to urban areas, and as was just said by the previous speaker, for lots of different reasons. By 2020, just over half of the world's population came to live in cities, and by 2050, it is estimated that 2/3 of every human on the earth will call an urban region their home. This massive movement of people has literally overwhelmed the capacity of cities and their governments to cope with this massive growth, generating enormous social and economic dislocation and disparities. Today, 1 in 3 urban dwellers in poorer regions of the world live in slums, where they have little access to basic services and human security. But these multitudes of people are willing to risk much in moving to cities because they perceive it to take them closer to opportunities of various kinds where they hope to seek a better life for themselves and their families. With this staggering growth, it is hardly surprising that cities are also overwhelmed environmentally. The growth of cities worldwide is placing profound pressure and stress on the watersheds and ecosystems of which they are a part. As cities grow, they displace wildlife and shrink habitats. Meanwhile, although cities only occupy between 2 and 3% of the Earth's land, they account for 75% of carbon emissions and between 60 to 80% of global energy consumption, and are thus significant contributors to climate change. So what are we to make of all of these statistics? I would argue at least 3 things. First, cities are ground zero in the battle for human and planetary resilience and well-being. While the sheer scale and magnitude of these statistics are indeed daunting, they should also clarify where we should be focusing our attention and energies over the next decades. Second, cities are a critical leverage point that we can influence. Beyond the sheer demographic force of global urbanization, however, cities possess an especially powerful strategic significance. The very forces that make them amplifiers of our greatest challenges, from housing and healthcare to climate change and peace and security, also make them potential amplifiers of potential solutions. Cities have always been engines of human ingenuity and creativity, learning and communication, and they can be now. Third, cities offer us 1,000 ways forward. A city-based approach to addressing many of the world's societal and environmental challenges also offers the advantage of being highly adaptable to local contexts, all the while being more scalable across contexts. Cities are, in short, one of the most critical levers humanity has for making meaningful progress on human and planetary challenges over the next generation. Now, if you agree with this, then we're left with the question, how do we unlock the generative and constructive power of cities to be amplifiers of solutions rather than amplifiers of our problems? It is here that I believe the world's various religious, spiritual, and indigenous communities have critical roles to play. What do they entail? What actions can faith communities undertake to ensure sustainable growth and secure a path toward an inclusive and resilient future? At their best, they have 4 critical roles to play based on the unique and unparalleled assets they bring. Some of these were mentioned again earlier, but here's how I would articulate them. First, faith communities are frontline caretakers. They possess distinctive spiritual and ethical commitments to care for the poor and the marginalized, the proverbial widows and orphans of our societies, and to ensure that no one is left behind. The origins of hospitals, hospices, schools, mutual aid societies, philanthropy, voluntary service, and so much more are testimony to the legacies of care and concern that the great religious and spiritual traditions have produced for millennia. Second, faith communities are community anchors. They possess vital contextual knowledge that makes them critical to identifying culturally relevant and appropriate, and thus sustainable, solutions to local and regional challenges. Faith communities and their networks and institutions are commonly rooted in places by virtue of long ties to the cultures, histories, and peoples of those places. They are thus not only anchored in their places, they act as anchors for the communities that call them home. Third, faith communities are peacemakers. They possess unrivaled local presence, on-the-ground organization, and social and spiritual membership. As a result, they have enormous capacity, not only for bonding together those with similar beliefs and values, but for fostering mutual understanding and respect across divisions. For all the ways that religions can and do divide communities, they are also uniquely equipped to seek the well-being of those outside their traditions for the sake of peace, solidarity, and the common good. Next, faith communities are social catalyzers. They are stewards of significant resources, both spiritual and material, that are vital for mobilizing people to action. Faith communities have historically been among the primary sources of charitable giving, activism, and entrepreneurial activity in our communities and around the world. Today, faith communities have property, buildings, significant assets that can be mobilized for the benefit of their environment and their neighbors. And lastly, faith communities are advocates for our highest human values. Faith communities and their leaders have unique platforms of influence and credibility among their peoples, their adherents, from which they can give voice to our highest ideals. Through their churches, temples, mosques, and every configuration that religious communities may take, our spiritual leaders proclaim to us truths, both temporal and transcendent. As varied as they are from one another, nearly all bear witness to the fundamental dignity of every human person and the sanctity of all the creatures of the earth. Again, at their best, faith communities play these critical roles for which there are simply few substitutes in most places in the world. Of course, it needs to be acknowledged that, like cities, religion has all too often amplified the very worst of humanity. But also, like cities, religion can and does amplify what's best in us. And what's more, our public officials, economic leaders, and others charged with finding solutions to the great and grand challenges of our time need faith communities to play these roles now more than ever. The conventional political, economic, and technological solutions are clearly insufficient, and more often than not are driving us collectively in the wrong direction. Faith communities are uniquely positioned to offer them sources of wisdom and insight that can help all of us not only see our interconnections and our interdependencies, but also equip us to reshape our economies, built environments, and systems of care in light of that wisdom. I'm convinced that whether faith communities come to play these roles in the world's cities and urban regions over the next 10 to 30 years will be a key determinant of whether the global megatrend of urbanization will be a driving force for sustainable development or human and planetary degradation. Finally, I'd like to close my remarks by suggesting one avenue for enabling the world's religious and spiritual traditions to work together, to enable their respective traditions to play these critical roles in our communities. As I mentioned at the start, I'm a member of the UN Habitat's SDG Cities Task Force. If you're not familiar with the SDG Cities initiative of UN Habitat, it is an effort to make progress on the Sustainable Development Goals in 1,000 cities, reaching over 1 billion people around the world by 2030. It is premised on the recognition that 2/3 of the SDG targets have an urban dimension, and that as the new urban agenda says, the battle for sustainable development will be won or lost in our cities. The SDG Cities Initiative offers a systemic way to support cities by connecting them to a value chain of global and local partners, inclusive and evidence-based strategic planning, strengthen capacity for local institutions, and the development and financing of high-impact projects, all in service of advancing the SDG cities city by city. Yet, as comprehensive as this initiative is, it will not meaningfully or sustainably meet its ambitious 1,000 cities goal without the central involvement of faith communities as a key partner. So I commend this initiative to you as one very tangible way you might take action together. The stakes have never been graver, nor the opportunity greater. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Josh. Looking forward to engaging more with your comments. And I want to turn over the microphone to Cameron, who can speak to us about that frontline care and local solutions. The title of his talk, Retrofitting Homes for Energy Efficiency, a Muslim-Christian Collaboration. Thank you, Cameron, for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I've heard some really wonderful kind of words of wisdom from everybody. And so I want to highlight today just a small case study in Balsall Heath in Birmingham, in the United Kingdom, of an area where I'm from, where the faith community has come together to deal with one of the pressing issues around the energy crisis that we're facing at the moment. And the campaign is very much led by people from not just the Muslim and Christian backgrounds, but also Hindu, Sikhs. There's both interfaith and intrafaith collaboration in order to solve some of the issues that we're facing. Now, for some of you who keep a keen eye on politics, in the UK, especially, like we're seeing energy prices and energy bills in the UK, they're predicted to rise considerably over the next few months, in fact, by 50% by some predictions. And this is due to issues that have increased wholesale energy costs and have subsequently put a number of energy suppliers out of business. And this is leading to a number of issues amongst communities, especially as we consider the potential impact of increasing energy bills on UK households, particularly on the most vulnerable and those on lower incomes. So when we talk about climate justice, quite often we think about injustices in the global south, and rightly so. But unfortunately, the sad state is that we're also facing climate injustices in the rich and development nations. So you're finding that people from lower incomes or in deprived neighborhoods are having to choose between either heating their homes or feeding their family. And we're finding that that's rising significantly. And with 2/3, and that's approximately 66% of adults in Britain reporting their cost of living increasing in the past month, rising energy prices are a growing factor in the squeeze on household targets. So if you look at the context in the UK, I think the UK has almost 29 million homes, and they are amongst the oldest and the least energy efficient houses in Europe. And we're finding that increasing amounts of precious energy is wasted in heating and cooling these leaky buildings. Now, in order for the UK to meet its legal obligations under the Climate Change Act in the UK, and also the commitments under the Paris Agreement to stay well below the 1.5 degrees, now we need to see emissions from heating and powering homes. They need to be reduced by 78% in less than 15 years, and then to zero by 2050. And almost 20% of the total UK carbon equivalent emissions comes from our homes. And so, as well as decarbonizing our energy sources, almost every home in the UK needs to be upgraded or retrofitted to some extent to improve energy efficiency. Now that, if you look at that, that's one home every 35 seconds from between now and 2050. So let's not underestimate the scale of the task. You know, it's not underrated. There's a huge amount of work to do. Now, when I talk about retrofitting, retrofitting is a technical term. It's a buzzword that's being used quite often. What is retrofit? It's basically the introduction of new materials or products or technologies into an existing building. Now, all the improvements add up to significantly reduces the amount of energy needed to occupy the building. It has many co-benefits, including improved comfort, health, is the act of fitting new systems designed for high energy efficiency and low energy consumption to buildings that have previously built without them. This can be anything from small activities such as fitting energy efficient light bulbs, or it could be installing state-of-the-art energy heating systems. And the reasons for doing this are very simple. A more efficient building will be cheaper to run, it has lower impact on the environment, and the higher energy rating that comes with this can increase the value of the property. And what we find that when we're talking to communities about this, instead of using the word retrofitting to get people to buy in to the concept, we just use the word upgrading. People need to feel like they're improving their homes. So obviously, upgrading, retrofitting, it's not a cheap option. It needs to be financed, and there needs to be a comprehensive plan to do this on a local and a national government level. And it's not happening easy. And this is where I'm proud to say that we're part of a group of local grassroots people from different faith backgrounds who have come together to campaign and advocate for retrofitting. So our vision for Balsall Heath, so Balsall Heath I have introduced, is the area I'm from, where I'm born and bred. It's a part of a wider area called Sparkbrook, which unfortunately is classed as one of the most socially deprived areas in the UK. So bringing people together has been a beautiful task. Everyone's bought into it. And one of our visions is to insulate all of Balsall Heath's homes, reducing their energy use by 95%. And to do this, rather than to do it individually, house by house, we want to ensure that we do it street by street. So because Balsall Heath's closely packed Victorian terrace homes can be cost effectively upgraded at scale rather than by piecemeal. So that's a shorter financial burden on the government or on people. It needs to be very community led, collaborate with the local community, artists, filmmakers, faith communities, ordinary people. We want to eradicate fuel poverty, where people don't have to choose between warmth and food. We want to transform health. people at the moment are living in cold, damp housing with mold and mildew. And this is, especially in our area, this is a primary cause of respiratory illness. And again, in Birmingham, the area Balsall Heath had the highest levels of COVID deaths because they were already suffering from respiratory issues in the past. And in the UK, cold home kills approximately 6,000 people a year. And we figured out that for every £1 invested in retrofitting, will save our National Health Service 42 pence a year. So there's a cost benefit analysis to this too. We want to remove all gas boilers which are run by fossil fuels and install low carbon and high efficiency heat pumps. We want to install electric solar panels on all south facing roofs, meeting all the home's needs with 100% renewable energy. We want to add triple gaze windows and door insulations. So there's a huge vision we have, but ultimately it's not just about the homes. We want to promote the One Planet Living principles, which includes ecology, green space, growing food, transport, water use, health and happiness, etc. So we can transform the lives of all the community. We can engage with them and build this sense of celebration, festival, sharing community resilience and local pride. And so far, it's very early days for our community in Balsall Heath. We have the UK's first carbon zero house. Please do have a look at their website or just Google zero carbon house in Birmingham. So that shows an example to the existing community of how you can have a house which drastically reduces energy bills and you live in good quality. We have a good community energy. We have a green culture. We want people want to do things. And, most importantly, we're finding that both local government and national government are starting to talk to us. We've recently had a meeting with Lord Deben, who is the government's climate change advisor. They have the Climate Change Committee, which is a parliamentary committee in the UK. They had a lengthy discussion with us and the faith community. You can see on the picture where we've all had a round table. And we're also working with the Birmingham City Council with their Route to Zero department around how we can bring people together to ensure all our homes are well insulated and made energy efficient. So that was just a very short, small case study in a very short amount of time. I hope I've been able to put some information together for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. I mean, it's fantastic to see what you're doing as a faith community in collaboration, with other faiths for your neighborhood. What's being discussed, you're showing us. So thank you for that. And we'll bring this into the conversation in a little bit too. So now I want to turn it over to Kushwant to speak on his particular topic, which he's titled Religious Actors as Drivers of Equity and Sustainability. Kushwant, thanks for your contribution.
Thank you so much. And let me share my screen. I have a short presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Thank you. Dear esteemed excellencies and colleagues, I very much appreciate that some of you even woke up in the middle of the night to join this thought-provoking UNEP Faith for Earth dialogue session. Religion is where religious people are, and cities are where more and more people are. The idea of living close to each other is perhaps as old as humankind itself. Religious actors do their work amidst the people who are not safe, who are left behind, whose dignity is trampled upon. And since 4 out of 5 people worldwide feel connected to a religion, and many volunteers contribute to equity at different levels, their force and contributions are unique. By 2050, so in less than 30 years from now, 4 out of 5 people will also live in cities. Dr. Iyad Abu Mobley from UNEP, our host, also pointed this out. So there's an obvious tie between actors inspired by religion and work being done in cities with and for the people. As the head of PART Secretariat, the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, I am glad that I can speak to you today. I will give you insights into how PART, like an inclusive and open city, brings together people in one place. Our members are working towards equity and sustainability, also in cities, and thus contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The order of these words is essential. First, equity, then sustainability. There can be no sustainability if anyone is left behind. PART has a clear SDG-based mandate to highlight the positive role of religious actors in sustainable development and humanitarian assistance. PART was founded in 2016 by 12 members. Since then, it has grown to become a partnership of 150 members from civil society, especially religious organizations, governments, multilateral entities, and academia. Aside from our focus on concrete SDGs like environmental protection, peace, health, food security, and gender, our partnership itself embodies SDG 17, showing how global partnerships help tackle global challenges facing humanity. When speaking of cities, we might have our own idea of what the word city means. To keep it brief, I will look at it from 2 perspectives. First, cities are places of refuge. When a family flees natural disaster, conflict, or other existential threats, it has the hope that everything will be okay if they just reach the next city. The city gives hope. Hope for better medical facilities, jobs, education, and other opportunities. In this sense, cities can be a heaven of safety, like the walled cities of past times, or an oasis to rest. Cities can be places of protection, where infrastructure and state and civil society services make life better. Secondly, cities can be a place where people and humanity are lost, where certain people are forgotten, discriminated, or exploited as if they were biological machines designed to function for a capitalist global market. Others in this session, like André Giscos, Beatrice Schultes, and Dr. Josh Yates, have also referred to these perspectives. While cities can be much more than just these simplified examples at the respective end of the spectrum, it helps us to understand better how PART members are working in this cityscape to enhance equity and sustainability. So let us now look at some concrete examples. I start with the Community of St. Egidius Humanitarian Corridors project. It supports refugees' legal and safe entry into the European Union in close cooperation with religious actors in Italy, France, Belgium, and Andorra. The unique networks of such religious-inspired organizations, the trust people have in them, and the many, many volunteers they rely on, allows religious organizations to support vulnerable people in existential crisis. And once these people in need get the opportunity to stay, live, and work, they enrich the host countries in many ways. The so-called guest workers and the many people who had to apply for asylum and sacrifice a lot to become insiders are just a few to name. Compassion not only for our fellow human beings, but also for animals and plants, and solidarity are at the heart of religion. So let us have a glimpse into the Kolping Indonesia Tree Project. It focuses on ecological and economic improvement. Over 200,000 trees have been planted in urban and suburban areas. Local tree planting committees became a means for organizational formation where mutual learning, participatory planning, and community-oriented decision-making took place. and new partnerships with state and civil society actors were established. But as outlined, cities are also places where people may be lost. Misio from Germany established the Shelter of Joy and Feeding Center program in the city of Manila. The center is a second home for vulnerable, marginalized children. These children often pick garbage on the polluted seashore of Manila Bay. The feeding center is a safety net for these children. The Ardian Foundation promotes equitable and inclusive living across Lebanon. After the August 4th, 2020 explosion, the PART member supported Mariam's Kitchen, which provided more than 150,000 meals at the height of the crisis. Today, they serve over 800 meals daily. Their slogan is, "We share a lot of love with a little food without discrimination." Our PART member organizations who are inspired by religion could share many more examples from all over the world. Especially during the height of the current pandemic, religious actors risked their own lives to help those in need. Baha'is made sure that families were not isolated by creating online interactions, offering a decentralized spiritual education service open to everyone. The courses tend to the moral education of children and facilitate the spiritual empowerment of young people, also in times of crisis. A similar project was developed by Arigato International, another PART member. Buddhists, for example, in Taiwan and Thailand spread awareness about vaccinations and took a stand against fake news and hate speech. Muslim organizations supported children in rural areas, improved water and hygiene facilities, raised awareness of women's health issues, and contributed to food security and livelihoods, for instance, in Tunisia. Sikhs shared uplifting spiritual wisdom. Our wise ones also called it langar, the food of the soul, which is at the heart of Sikhi, the Sikh religion, not only in person, but also through online and social media. At the same time, Sikhs distributed several 100,000 meals free of cost daily worldwide, not only in their community centers, but also for those who were isolated or too weak to cook or buy food. Via social media, they raised awareness about fake news and gave moral support via helplines. In India, for instance, they provided oxygens when hospitals were overwhelmed with COVID-19 infected patients. In each of these examples, the people behind the religious organizations, many of them volunteers, were not driven by salaries, but by love. Love inspired them to take every possible step to help those in need and towards more equity. They ensured that leaving no one behind is not mere lip service. They tried their best that the agency and dignity of the ones forgotten by those who are actually in charge were restored. If you want to dive deeper, I encourage you to join the session with our PART workstream, Water, Environment and Climate Action. It's called We Care. It will focus on the power of faith partnerships to safeguard nature on 2nd of March, 2 p.m. onwards Eastern African time. Before I come to the end, let me emphasize, whatever background we may have, we can be those who maintain what surrounds us, or we can be those who destroy it. It is our choice. Young climate and peace activists rightly say, we are all facing the same storm. The only difference is that many sit in dingy, others in a tanker, and some in a cruise ship. Today, we have come together to dialogue because we want to save those in need and what Mother Earth unconditionally provides for. Religious, spiritual, and indigenous wisdom tells us the pollution outside comes from the pollution within. Therefore, sustainable development, which means that there are no or minor negative long-term side effects caused by our actions, is not possible without the openness to change ourselves. As a Sikh, I need to stress that technological solutions alone will not save us and the wonderful blue planet which we are visiting as guests. So if you agree with this, then it is clear that without personal and collective sacrifices, neither equity nor sustainable development can be achieved. So there's hope when we start putting ourselves in the center of change. There is hope when we start focusing on human rights and universal ethical values as one human family. And in all humility, it is indeed the responsibility, especially of those who regard themselves as religious people, to be at the forefront of change. I thank you and wish you, all of us, inspiring discussions.
Kushwan, thank you for an inspiring talk and giving us a glimpse of what partners in part are doing in cities all around the world. Getting that glimpse is very powerful and brings life to the words that we're speaking. And to that end, I'm going to introduce the final speaker, the topic that she's going to speak out on, building sustainable cities through individual transformation. So, Ms. Bhuvana, please, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this topic.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to start the presentation. So I just hope you're able to see it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. My gratitude to the UNEP and the organizers for having me as part of this very important and crucial dialogue. A cursory look at the world tells us that 85% of the world's populace identify themselves with a religion that influences their beliefs and behavior, while the rest remain non-religious or have atheistic beliefs. And the COVID-19 pandemic revealed urban vulnerability and sustainability of cities was truly put to test. There was increased risk of food shortages, lack of hospital beds and oxygen, and a widening disparity between the haves and the have-nots. So sustainability became the key word everywhere. And thus what we are discussing today, I feel, is the most relevant. So sustainability is about need. So let need define what truly belongs to whom and not the purchasing power. It is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future. It is rather about need than greed, because sustainability does not advocate underutilization. The need for a values-based approach for sustainability. So during school closures, children's health and safety were jeopardized, with domestic violence and child labor was increasing. The mental health crisis among young people reached unprecedented levels. Advances in gender equality were threatened, with school closures placing an estimated 10 million more girls at risk of early marriage in the next decade, and at increased risk of dropping out of school during the COVID pandemic. In fact, the World Economic Forum in its white paper stressed that a values-based approach to global negotiation and conflict resolution could prove vital for boosting opportunities for inclusive economic growth and security. As of 2021, if we see, 4.46 billion people live in urban areas and 3.42 billion live in the rural areas. The world's urban population has grown rapidly from 751 million in 1950 to about 4.46 billion in 2021, which will grow to about 6.68 billion by 2050. We are adding about 2.2 billion people to urban areas. And if we look at the dialogue that we are having today, it's about the role of faiths. The role of faiths to promote human values and sustainability. There is one beautiful saying from the ancient texts of Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma means the eternal, it's the changeless law. And it revealed the finer truths of life. In fact, Sanatana Dharma is not any particular religion. It's a supreme law of truth of all existence as divinity. So the Sanatana Dharma proclaims that everything is divine. It also encourages us to behave in accordance with that truth by accepting all and rejecting none. So by releasing and by realizing this innate oneness of divinity in all creation, so the natural behavior is to love everyone as oneself and express that love as sacrifice for the sake of each other. And if we look at the four values of sustainability, we say it's reduce, reuse, recycle, and also refuse. The essence of all religions, when examined carefully, teaches us thriftiness over thoughtless spending, generousness over miserliness, compassion over callousness, and sacrifice over selfishness. So we reduce. What is reduced? We consume only what is needed so that there is no artificial demand and price rise. That is reduce. When we say reuse, it means the distribution of useful and excess resources to others to create an equitable society, or generousness over miserliness. When we say recycle, it is about extending usability of resources by reusing them to preserve the natural resources. So, compassion. We can say reduce, reuse, recycle, but then can we replenish? And that's where the fourth R is the key. We say refuse, sacrifice for the sake of others based on their need before consuming ourselves. So, sacrifice over selfishness. We refuse to take what we do not need. And then the world has hope to become sustainable. It is a personal value that stems from individual transformation, because every single human, as we walk the terrain of this earth, we must contribute towards a sustainable living by being more sensitive and sensible. So, how do we bring about this kind of personal transformation in the hearts of all? That is the big question today. And we firmly believe that education is the best way to do it. It is about showing children a way of living that is in harmony with nature and all its life around, a means of learning that prepares them to consume only what they need, and more importantly, an opportunity to serve others in the society. A child is grounded and nurtured with such values of harmony, love, and wisdom, and this will contribute towards a sustainable society. Because children contribute to the largest global population. And there is this Native American saying, which I'm sure we all have heard: we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So, children are very crucial when we want to transform cities. So, we transform cities by transforming the children of today. And children contribute to the largest global population. We have 2.6 billion children who are less than 20 years of age, and 2.3 billion are young adults between 20 and 39. So a sustainable future for all can be built by instilling in children the values for sustainability. In fact, we need to look at education as an investment and not as an expenditure. And investment of education should take care definitely of the following aspects. And this is where we as an organization across the 30 countries that we operate, the SAI Global Federation of Foundations, we bestow education free of cost. We bestow the wisdom of the eternal ancient truths of all religions. And we believe that values-based education shall nurture the good qualities that are already innate in children. In fact, Iyad, in his address, did speak about how education shapes the behavior of people. So the gift of education, when provided as a gift, literally develops an innate sense of gratitude. When this education is also given the highest ideals embedded with the human values, It shows the path to lead a life of fulfillment and of purpose. So such students, what happens is they are groomed, they become responsible, they become kind, they become sensitive individuals, and they expand their vision to reach out to all beyond caste, creed, religion, boundaries, ethnicities, countries, and they embrace everyone because they believe that all are one, and they become sensitive to others, and they become sensitive to the needs of others. They put others before themselves. So it is about building sustainable cities by bestowing the right kind of education. So a sustainable city is a manifestation of an attitude, and we call it the 3H formula, which we infuse into each of our service activities in the fields of nutrition, education, and healthcare. We say compassion in the heart, competence in the hands, and brilliance in the head. In fact, our work, like we said, is the threefold elixir to build the sustainable cities. And in the last 10 years or so, we have been imparting values-based education to over 7,000 children globally, out of which 5,000 are in India. And in the field of healthcare, we've been imparting free pediatric cardiac surgeries. Apart from that, many interventions through screenings and treatment to many cities around the world. And we also have a nutrition program where we are serving where we have served rather over 200 million breakfast meals. We serve 500,000 children every single morning, and we embrace every single child out there in the society, because we have seen one thing, that this has infused a lot of gratitude in the children. And when the children learn gratitude, when they grow up, they have this sense of gratitude in them, which then gets passed on to the others. Very quickly about what we do in the 4 regions across the 30 countries. We have 12 centers of human development. This is a little bit of what we do through the Sri Sathya Sai Lokaseva Gurukulam group of institutions and the University for Human Excellence that we have, where education is provided absolutely free of cost from grade 6 to doctoral studies. They are human values-based, integral, holistic education, spiritual education, where the essence of all the religions are taught. Because at the end of the day, we are all one. We are one global family. And in the field of healthcare, like we spoke about, we have the Sri Sathya Sai Sanjeevani Child Heart Care Centers. In fact, they are the only child heart care centers globally which provides absolutely free of cost healthcare system, and it provides the preventative, curative, educative healthcare model. Women and child health are prioritized, and like I said in the past, we also have the multi-nutrient supplement, and we have the social care projects through the Annapurna Morning Nutrition Program, which is all completely free of cost. We believe that the idea of sustainability is not new. In fact, what you see on the screen is the very first opening verse of one of the most ancient texts of India, the Ishavasya Upanishad from the Yajurveda. It says, all that is seen in this ever-changing world is enveloped by the divine. Therefore, consume with sacrifice, do not take another person's wealth. Now, however simple this may sound, it is extremely profound. It means give more, take less. This is what is meant by consuming with sacrifice. In fact, when Mahatma Gandhi was asked by a journalist to summarize his life in 3 words, he quoted these 3 words, Tena Tyaktena Bunjita. It means consume with a sense of sacrifice. And when we sacrifice first and consume later, when we give more and take less, we become sustainable as a society, as a city, as a nation, as a planet, and as a human race. In fact, John F. Kennedy said it so beautifully when he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And I would like to conclude with this final slide. From what can I get in everything that we do through the day? Can it not become what can I give? From what can I get to what can I give is sustainability. And I would just like to conclude by saying that when we believe that we are born not to take but to give, when we are born to sacrifice and not to accumulate, and when we are born to serve and not to rule, we become sustainable. Thank you very, very much for having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhavana. Thank you to all the speakers today who have contributed your expertise, your insights, your passion for cities and people, and the conversation that we're having. We're pretty much out of time, unfortunately, to have an ongoing conversation. However, I just want to make a few quick comments and also encourage you to, if you're listening, there's an opportunity for you to share your stories with the upcoming World Urban Forum, the UN Habitat's 11th World Urban Forum, within the context of the UN Habitat Better Cities Film Festival. Within the UN Habitat Better Cities Film Festival, there will be a section of films that will be devoted to faith stories, which faiths are helping to make cities better. And here's a link in which you can contribute your stories to this festival. And Cameron, who you heard from for the 10th World Urban Forum, submitted some stories from his community about making a safer neighborhood. And they were screened, and he won an award for his film. So I know that there's some extra stories out there, and please share those. And look online at this announcement, and it'll tell you how to do that. I think, with our time being up, I just want to say couple of thoughts. One is, we have started a conversation here, given a platform by UNEP to talk about cities and to focus on cities as faith-based organizations and people of faith. We also have an opportunity to do this with a platform provided by UN Habitat. And I do believe that this is the beginning of some energy around faith organizations talking together about the impact that we can have in cities. And as we learn together, with an opportunity to speak on this platform, to dialogue together, we'll be able to do more collaboration for the common good. We'll take action together for the common good in cities and learn from each other how to develop our cities in ways that can have a sustainable future for the common good. And so as we go on these next several days, let's think about how we can continue this conversation going. And there's some organizations that can come together and continue the conversation with the partnership with UNEP and UN Habitat, and go deeper, further in this particular area of conversation. Iyad, do you want to say one last word before we leave? A word of thank you, perhaps?
Well, thank you very much. This is a really impressive dialogue. I'm impressed with the number of participants, the reactions that everybody has been posting on the chat. It is indeed a very important subject. As it was mentioned by everybody, in a few years, we will be occupying more than 70% of us will be living in cities, so we need to deal with it. And we need to deal with it from a moral perspective, but also engage faith actors who are powerful everywhere, but especially in cities that we use these moral principles, we use our spiritual guidance that we have in terms of reshaping the cities that we want. So thank you everybody for your contributions. Certainly we will be sharing all these presentations with everybody, but stay with us for the wonderful dialogue. We still have 24 sessions to go. This is the first one. Join us at 2 p.m. with high-level faith leaders for the official opening of the dialogue series. So thank you, Chris. Thank you to all our partners. I'm grateful, and all the best of luck to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.